conversation. And that said, gentlemen, let's talk. You drive through the 7th District, and you see a lot of empty buildings, warehouses, I mean, more than usual, and it may be a part of the economy, but in your particular district, strip malls, and a question that I want to start off with is, we talk about stimulus, for lack of a better word. Let me throw this to both of you, and to you first, Mr. Potosnak. What's your stimulus plan for the 7th District?
Well, first I want to thank you, Brian, and all the folks here at News 12 New Jersey for hosting this debate, Congressman Lance, for finding time in your schedule to be here to debate. It's such an important part of our democracy. You're going to hear a lot tonight from Congressman Lance, sort of Washington bluster. And the big question is, how do we get people back to work? And since going to Washington, Congressman Lance has spent less than 59 seconds addressing that issue on the House floor.
But before we get to that, what's your plan?
That's exactly right. To get people back to work, we have to make sure we support small businesses. I grew up working alongside my parents in a small business, manufacturing batteries for police and firefighters, first responders. Together, we worked hard work and also cooperation to ensure that we could grow that business. I understand that small businesses are the engine of our economy. I know how to create jobs, and that is by supporting our small businesses, ensuring they have access to capital so that they can build and create jobs, expand their business, improve their business. You talked about strip malls. What I see in the strip malls across this district are for sale signs and for lease signs and too many foreclosure signs. What we need to do is unleash our entrepreneurial spirit because our small business owners, they're risk takers. And when they see that empty store, they think, what can I put here? What would be a nice business for this community? And the problem is they don't have access to capital to make that dream a reality. So we need to support them with small business loans. My opponent opposed many pieces of legislation to give them that access. In fact, one small business owner where I launched my campaign was held up by the inaction of Congress. In addition, we have to help our small businesses purchase equipment to become more efficient. And so I support writing off capital over a short amount of time rather than many years to stimulate the purchase. And then
let me hold you there. We're going to tackle some of these issues as we have the discussion. But Congressman, I want to allow you to respond to that. Now, you of course have been openly critical of the president's stimulus plan, but let me ask you the same question about your stimulus plan for the 7th District.
Thank you very much for having us, and I appreciate this opportunity. I want to thank News 12, and I want to thank Mr. Potosnak, and I'm pleased to be here this evening. There is uncertainty in the business community, in my judgment. The one word I would use is uncertainty. So we need greater certainty because it's small business that will create 7 in 10 new jobs desperately needed across the country, and desperately needed here, Brian. The unemployment rate across the country is 9.6%. Tragically, the unemployment rate here is 9.7%. So what would I do? Greater certainty. Certainty as to the tax code. Are taxes going to increase at the end of the year? Businesses do not know. I do not favor raising taxes. Certainty as to lending and whether or not banks are lending. I'm on the Financial Services Committee in Washington, and constantly we have before us those in the business community who say banks are not lending. And so we need greater certainty in the banking industry for lending. And then greater certainty, frankly, in the health care bill, which I favor modification. And I think that this has been harmful to businesses. So the one word I would use is greater certainty.
Okay, let me throw this other question to kind of piggyback on that. New Jersey has the highest property taxes in the nation, coupled with a 9.6% unemployment and an unfriendly climate for business. Collectively, that is driving business and residents out of New Jersey. How do we stop the bleeding? Congressman, I'll let you tackle that one first.
I think Governor Christie is doing a tremendous job in trying to moderate property tax increases with his toolkit and with his 2% cap. I'm a supporter of the governor's. He is a supporter of mine. Our property taxes are the highest in the nation. When I was in the state legislature, I was responsible for a constitutional amendment that prohibited further state borrowing without voter approval. The Lance Amendment, we would be even in worse shape if that had not become law. And so I favor what the governor is doing, and I think that will tend to moderate property taxes.
Mr. Potosnak?
Just to finish a little bit on the plan, because I think what you heard the congressman in the answer to the question, how do we create jobs? No plan. Another important investment, in addition to supporting our small businesses, is supporting the research and development innovation sector in New Jersey. New Jersey's 7th Congressional District is home to some of the most innovative corporations in the world. And we need to make sure that they stay here. And I think you're right when you indicate it's getting harder to keep those companies here, and more importantly, those jobs. To support those companies means investing in research and development. I support making permanent the tax credits for research and development. And in addition, providing partnerships between the federal government and our research and development companies, both pharmaceutical, biotechnological. Biotechnology was the one industry that grew in this recession, and it did that right here in our state. In addition to our companies that are doing high-tech innovation. Through those partnerships, we can leverage the skills and abilities of both the workers, but also the inventiveness. Because I'm concerned we're losing our edge in America, and it's the career politicians, like my opponent, who are standing in the way of getting it back.
Well, you both, that's interesting. You both say that you want to get America back on a competitive edge, but you both have very different ideas on how to do that. Obviously, Congressman, you have a record in Congress.
Yes.
I want to talk about some of that
absolutely.
for a moment. This year, you voted against H.R. 4213, which would have extended unemployment benefits and added incentives for small businesses. You voted against H.R. 5297, the Small Business Lending Fund, and you voted against the $26 billion education jobs bill that would have funded jobs for teachers. And there seems to be some interconnection among those, but I want to ask you to explain your vote on those three issues.
Yes, first on the bill for the $26 billion, about 10 or 11 billion of that would have gone for teaching. That bill is not paid for. This is a 2-year temporary program, and the payback, it's paid for over 10 years, and it's paid for in part through a reduction in food stamp funding to increase over time. And I don't think that's going to happen, and therefore it's not paid for. And even if it were paid for over 10 years, it seems to me that this is typical Washington action in a liberally controlled Congress, Nancy Pelosi's Congress. 2 years of effect, paid for over 10 years, and I'm simply opposed to that. We currently have a debt in this country of $13 trillion. The annual deficit in the year that ended on September 30th was $1.3 trillion. Last year, $1.4 trillion. We have to get our fiscal house in order. Regarding the other bills, they're not paid for either. I think we need to be more fiscally responsible. And the best way to create jobs in America, in my judgment, is to bring down the federal deficit so that businesses can create the jobs that we need. I do agree, however, we need credits for research and development. In this congressional district, which is the medicine chest of the entire world, we have more pharmaceutical and medical device positions than any other district in the United States. We are being punished by the health care bill, which has a tax on medical devices at the wholesale level, a 2.5% tax. I oppose that. It's been devastating to the industry and also to the industry in neighboring states as well. And I want to continue to be an advocate for the strong industries that exist in this district, including the medicine chest of the world.
Interesting party division here. Republicans suggest, well, we can't pay for everything, but Democrats suggest, well, we have to pay for these things. And the other side of that question for you, Mr. Potosnak, is how do we pay for all of these things if those are, in fact, the things you want to do?
Well, I mean, I think we heard the Congressman struggling to answer the question about those three bills. The education jobs bill, I want to be clear, the Congressman's wrong. It is paid for, and he actually said that himself after saying it wasn't paid for. It's paid for by over 10 years to invest in our future, and that is 4,000 teachers, putting them back into our classroom where they belong. Because we understand that our students are our future leaders, our entrepreneurs, and our innovators. And we have to make sure that they're supported, and that education is the way that we're going to get our edge back. Because 12 years from now, when those first graders graduate, if those teachers weren't in the room helping them, to prepare them, and give them the tools they need to be successful, we're going to have another recession, and that is an intellectual recession. And he's flat out wrong about the fact that it's not paid for. And I think we need to be clear about that. In addition, the food stamp provision that he's talking about being cut back, that he actually voted against the increase. And my hope is that in 2014, when the food stamp increase that they're cutting back to pay for this bill, that will have our economy picked up. So we won't need to depend on that increase because it was part of the recovery package. I believe in fiscal responsibility and making sure that things are paid for. And that's why I support PAYGO, which is a piece of legislation my opponent opposed in Congress that requires any new spending be offset with cuts.
Okay, that sounds like it makes sense. Let me ask you this. The big debate right now, Bush tax cuts. They've been described as tax cuts for the wealthy. They expire this year, and the debate is on over whether to keep them intact, assuming the trickle-down theory works, or keep the cuts only for middle and working class families, assuming the rich have enough tax breaks. Where do you stand on that?
I support tax cuts that meet two criteria. The first is that they're for our middle class. And the second is that they're fiscally responsible. I support extending the Bush tax cuts for the middle class. I have not heard a plan as to how to pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. And what's happening in Congress with Congressman Lance is he's hijacking tax cuts for the middle class, holding them up to support the tax cuts for the highest earners, our top 2%. And I'm extremely concerned if we don't find a way to pay for those, the debt that it's going to shoulder on our children.
Congressman, we'll give you a chance to respond to that.
Yes, thank you. That's nonsense. I'm not hijacking this at all. I wish we'd had a vote in September, but under Speaker Pelosi's regime, no vote was taken because there are enough Democrats who agree with us that taxes should not rise on anybody. I favor extension of the tax cuts. I favor extension of them for everybody, and I hope that we're able to accomplish that in the lame duck session of Congress. But let me be more specific. If there is a plan that's put on the table, a compromise to extend them only for 2 years, I would vote for that. And if ultimately there's a plan only for the middle class, then of course I think that those tax cuts should be extended. The reason I favor extending the tax cuts for everyone is that 50% of small business pays taxes through the personal income tax, the 1040 form. And the new jobs that will be needed in America, 7 in 10 of those new jobs are created by small business. Regarding the cost, I believe that there will be greater economic activity if we have middle-class tax cuts and greater business creation, the creation of jobs so desperately needed, if we extend the tax cuts across the board. I'd like to extend them for 10 years, but I am willing to extend them for 2 years if that is what is on the table. The job-killing, democratically controlled Congress of Nancy Pelosi has raised the unemployment rate in this country from under 8% to now 9.6% nationally, and 9.7% in New Jersey. And one of the reasons that has occurred, in my judgment, is there is uncertainty regarding the tax cuts.
Let me take you about to another part of that uncertainty that you mentioned. Wall Street and the banking industry have had their way with America over the last couple of years. We're talking about the mortgage fiasco, the exorbitant credit card fees, questionable loan practices. You sit on that Financial Services Committee. Why do you oppose the creation of a new consumer protection agency as part of the Financial Reform Act?
I favor consumer protection and safety and soundness to be together. Traditionally, that has been two roles that have been together, and I do not favor separating those roles. The new agency that was created was supposed to have a director appointed by the President with the advice and consent of the United States Senate. The President has circumvented the procedure and has appointed Elizabeth Warren as a presidential advisor. And I questioned Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner on this matter when he came before the Financial Services Committee. And I call upon the President to appoint a director to that agency with advice and consent of the U.S. Senate. Now, regarding the issue of credit cards, I was one of a few Republicans who voted for credit card reform. I think that that was important. That came out of the Financial Services Committee under the leadership of both sides of the aisle. The bill was sponsored by Carolyn Maloney of Manhattan, a Democrat, and I was one of the Republicans who voted for that. Regarding the Financial Services bill, it did not touch Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I know there are a lot of moving parts as to why we had the financial breakdown. It's really a meltdown in many ways. But in my opinion, chief among them is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we need to get a handle on that situation.
Mr. Potosnak, let me ask your response to that. And again, Is there, on the Democrat side, a risk of over-regulation of the financial sector?
I think one of the things the congressman forgot to mention, as far as why he opposed this piece of legislation, the key piece of legislation to come out of the Financial Services Committee is that he takes 60% of his campaign contributions from special interests, 30% of which, or over $300,000, from the committees that the special interests that he oversees on that committee, the financial services industry and the insurance industry. And he voted against that bill because that's how they wanted him to vote. 2 years ago, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, our economy was led into the gutter. 8 million people lost their homes. His responsibility was to step up and fight for our families and businesses to ensure we never have another situation like that. He opposes the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a bureau that's going to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. He takes $5,000, now $10,000 from Goldman Sachs, a company that was sued by the SEC for its role in the financial meltdown. I am very concerned about the influence of these special interests.
What's interesting, you didn't tell us what you would do. In that case, you told us what he didn't do, but I want to give you, Congressman, a chance to respond to that before we move on to the rest of that question.
Thank you. I've always voted my conscience and will continue to vote my conscience, and that's why I voted as I did, for example, on the credit card issue. I do believe the financial reform bill should have addressed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. My opponent takes contributions from labor unions. I have not criticized him for that. I think that we receive contributions from a wide variety of sources. I have raised more money from individual contributors than my opponent. Certainly, I think that it's important always to vote your conscience. I have a clear record of doing that. In being endorsed today by several newspapers across central New Jersey, one of the reasons I was endorsed, this is by the Recorder newspapers in New Jersey today, the Bernardsville News, the Echo Sentinel, the Hunterdon Review. One of the reasons that I was endorsed in the editorial was because of my integrity. I am proud of my record, and I always vote my conscience.
I'd like a chance to respond.
Go ahead.
As far as what would I do, I would make sure we never have to bail out the banks again, to ensure that we can prevent another calamity, that the risky practices of Wall Street, that there's someone watching. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau does just that. It ends predatory lending. And as far as getting more contributions from individuals, you've far outraised me. But you've also accepted $600,000 from special interests. That's twice what I've raised. And I find it shocking for you to stand before me and say that I take money from labor unions as if you don't. In fact, you've taken money from labor unions as well, and I think it's important for us to clarify that.
I do not criticize my opponent for taking money from labor unions. I clearly stated that. I don't criticize him at all.
All right, that's it. Let's move on to something else. Mr. Potosnak, you have never held public office, and you've been quoted as saying there's a definite need for real-world people to get involved and represent their communities in Washington. Now, Mr. Lance, on the other hand, has served your first term in Congress. You were a state senator for 6 years and a member of the New Jersey Assembly for 11 years. Let me ask each of you, how would each of you describe real-world people, and how would you effectively represent them? And I'll throw that question to you first.
Well, I think my background as being a science teacher, as someone who put themselves through 2 degrees at Rutgers, as someone who started a business to help make ends meet, built on my entrepreneurial skills that I learned as a kid, helped me to understand the struggles that our families are facing. And when I said that we need real-world people with real-world experience, what I'm saying is someone like my opponent, who's a third-generation politician, who's never had a job outside of politics, they're focused on one thing: winning their next re-election, putting the needs of their campaign and winning ahead of the interests of our families and our businesses, making sure the needs of their biggest contributors, like Wall Street, big banks, and the insurance industry, that they're met, instead of the needs of our struggling students, instead of the needs of the folks who are out of work. And again, 59 seconds since going to Washington is how long he spent addressing jobs on the House floor.
So you'd support something like term limits?
Absolutely. I've already promised that I will not serve more than 8 years. When I went to Washington as an Einstein Fellow, it's a program for math and science teachers to take their classroom experience, their real-world experience, to Washington to inform education policy. I was there for 1 year. And in that year, I knew that I had a deadline. And I worked very hard to improve science and education policy. And I was advising members of Congress, like Congressman Lance. I was offered the opportunity to stay around for another year to reapply. It's a very selective program. I was selected as one of 17 in the entire country to be an Einstein Fellow. And I took that opportunity to build on what I learned to continue to improve education policy. And we know we work best under deadlines. And the reason I mention that story is because I had 2 deadlines. I had 1 year, and I worked very hard and helped to write a bill to improve math and science education. And that second year, I knew I had just 1 more year to continue to improve education. And I helped to craft a piece of legislation to ensure wherever children live, they have access to a high-quality education. It's not dependent on their zip code.
Congressman, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that, and to the fact that you've been around, and it does take freshman congressmen a while to learn the system. So let me leave you with that.
Thank you. This is really where I'm most disappointed in Mr. Potosnak. He's criticized me personally, and he's criticized my family. And I'd like to give our audience the facts. I had a great uncle who served 1 year in the General Assembly. For 45 years, he owned a general store with my grandfather, Lance Brothers General Store in Glen Gardner in northern Hunterdon County in Congressional District 7, what is now Congressional District 7. It was not a career in politics. He served 1 year in the General Assembly. And then, Mr. Potosnak, you criticized my late father. My late father was for 70 years in the private practice of law, which is clearly a small business, Mr. Potosnak. My father did serve in the state Senate. He was state Senate president, and he's an inspiration for me. But clearly, he was a small businessman in the private practice of law. Mr. Potosnak, you've just said that I've never held a job in the private sector. That's inaccurate. I was in the private practice of law with my late father and with my brother. So that's simply inaccurate, and I'm very disappointed that you would say that. But regarding the fundamental issue, it seems to me we need in public service those who are committed to public service, and I commend Mr. Potosnak for his public service. He has been teaching at the high school level. He's been teaching chemistry, one of the hard sciences, and we need talented teachers, particularly in public schools, particularly at the high school level in mathematics and the hard sciences. And so I commend you, Mr. Potosnak, for your public service. And I'm extremely disappointed that you should criticize my public service, and you should criticize the public service of my late father and of my late great uncle, whom I never knew because he died in 1939. They both ran small businesses, and I have been involved in the private sector in our family law firm.
Well, let's talk about the two of you. More than 13% of New Jersey residents are over the age of 65. We know the boomers are on the horizon. In just 15 years, the seniors will comprise more than 17% of New Jersey's population. Both of you say you're committed to seniors and to protecting Social Security. Given what's on the horizon, how do you do that, Mr. Potosnak?
I think we need to make sure we fulfill our commitment to our seniors who have been doing everything right, paying into Social Security. And I oppose my opponent's leadership that has talked about raising the retirement age to 70 and privatizing Social Security. I think it's extremely important that we have policies that ensure that our seniors can count on Social Security upon retirement. They've been working hard and doing everything right over the course of their lives, and we need to make sure we provide and be consistent with that promise. As far as access to health care, the health care legislation that my opponent opposed helped our seniors. It enclosed the donut hole so they wouldn't have to choose between groceries and eating or paying for medication. And my opponent supports full repeal of this legislation. I support repairing it. A commitment to our seniors means a commitment through and through, each step of the way, both so they can retire on a fixed income and count on that Social Security, but also that they're cared for, that their health is a priority for our nation.
We talked briefly, I believe it was maybe 8 months to a year ago, about getting drugs from Canada and being able to order these drugs wholesale. There was some debate about that, and Congressman, you may enlighten us on that, but where do you guys stand on that particular part of this health care issue. Congressman, let me turn
thank
to
you. First, might I address Social Security and Medicare? I favor protection of Social Security and of Medicare. They're sacred trusts to the American people. I do not favor privatization of either of those programs. Social Security Act was passed in 1935. It has been, without doubt, the single most important program domestically in this country. Medicare was passed in 1965, and I believe that we have to preserve both of them. The Congress will be advised by a presidential commission on Social Security and Medicare in December. And it's a bipartisan commission. It's headed by Alan Simpson, a former Republican United States Senator from Wyoming, and Erskine Bowles, who was President Clinton's chief of staff from North Carolina. And I, of course, await the recommendations of this bipartisan commission. I hope we can ensure the protection of Social Security for the baby boomers and for succeeding generations based upon the recommendations of that commission. And this would be similar, Brian, to what happened in a bipartisan way in 1983, a generation ago, when Social Security was saved by President Reagan, a Republican, and by Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill, a Democrat. And I look forward to working in a bipartisan capacity, and I want to assure our audience that I favor Social Security and Medicare. Now, regarding the reimportation of drugs, I think we have to be careful there, because many of those drugs are actually manufactured in Asia, and there are not the quality controls that we have on medicines here in this country. And so I think we have to be very careful about that. And I think on a bipartisan basis in Congress, there is the recognition that we have to be careful, because we do not want a medicine supply from those countries that do not have the quality controls that we clearly have in this country.
On the issue of health care, several states have filed lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of the new health care law, specifically whether or not Congress overstepped its authority by requiring people to buy health insurance. Do you think those lawsuits are valid, and what do you think needs to be done to expand the availability of affordable health care? Mr. Potosnak?
I'm not a lawyer. I'm a science teacher and also a small business owner, so I can't speak to the exact merits of those lawsuits. I will let them play out in those areas. I think we're seeing politics play into some of those. You know, I'm someone who lived without health care. My mother had to take a job at night loading boxes onto a UPS truck because her primary job didn't offer health care. Our employment-based system is not working for many people. Right now, with an unemployment so high, the number one concern, getting people back to work, which my opponent spent 59 seconds addressing on the House floor, many people without jobs don't have access to health care. And the health care reforms that were passed by Congress have gone a long way to helping provide access and improving health care, both for our seniors so that they could have regular screenings and examinations that would be covered, and also for children so they could be on their parents' insurance policy to age 26. And additionally, making sure that we could improve health care through data and improvements and exchanges so we don't have wasteful, duplicative tests. But it's certain that we need to do more. We need to provide more competition, that there are some openings for us to look at how do we keep people healthy. I can tell you certainly that the Congressman has put healthy profits of the insurance industries ahead of healthy people.
Well, Congressman, let me ask you to respond to that. You supported some measures of
Yes.
the President's health care plan, but others you didn't.
Yes, correct. First, to answer your question regarding the suits, that will proceed in the federal district courts across America. Undoubtedly will be appealed to the various courts of appeal and then ultimately reach the Supreme Court, and I don't know how the Supreme Court would rule on that. I was one of the co-sponsors of a bill of a group of Republicans. We're known as the Tuesday Lunch Group. We're Republicans from the East, the Middle West, and California. We tend to be centrist, and we had our own proposal. It certainly did not come out of committee and was not passed into law for sure. It would have said you could not be discriminated against based upon a pre-existing condition, that there would be no cap as to amounts paid out for disability, and letting young people stay on their parents' policies. Those provisions are contained in the health care bill that was passed into law. I favor them, and I commend those parts of the bill. However, my chief objection to the bill is in two parts. Number one, the promise was made that it would bend the health care curve. Right now we pay out of our gross domestic product 17.3% for health care. We've just been advised in Congress by the nonpartisan agency that advises us that in 10 years under this new health care bill, that will increase to 19.6%. So clearly, we're moving in the wrong direction. We should be moving in the other direction, other advanced industrial societies.
But didn't that same office say that without that health care plan, we would have moved farther in paying more than we're going to pay now?
That's why we need the reforms I have suggested. And secondly, the reform that I think is most important is medical malpractice insurance reform. That is not contained in the bill at all, not one whit of medical malpractice insurance reform. And I think that that alone, if that component were in the bill, and I hope the new Congress will address that, that could decrease as a percentage of gross domestic product by as much as 4%. And so it's not a silver bullet, but certainly I think we should have had medical malpractice insurance reform in the bill. The fact that this does not bend the cost curve, number one, and the fact, number two, that there's no medical malpractice insurance reform, I think are critical components. And I hope that the new Congress, in a bipartisan way, because, of course, the president will still be president, there's going to be a Democratic president, I would hope we might gain the majority in the House of Representatives. I think the Senate is I don't know how.
Still up in the air.
It's still up in the air. So we're going to have to work in a bipartisan way, I hope, with support of the new Congress, particularly in the House of Representatives, and recognizing we have to work with the White House, that we can change some of the situation, particularly regarding medical malpractice insurance reform, and also trying to bend the health care curve downward.
You talk about bipartisanship, and obviously when you look at the last few elections, especially in the 7th District, Republicans carried the 7th District for the last 30 years. The last two elections were very close. Does that suggest that there's more than partisan politics at work? What does each of you have to do to get the fence sitters and the independents to vote for you? Mr. Potosnak, I'll ask you first.
I think the 7th Congressional District is one that's extremely competitive because we have very discerning voters who can see through all the Washington bluster, the talking points that are handed down from the political party, and understand how it impacts their lives and make a choice on Election Day between someone who has real-world experience, who's going to put their needs, the needs of their family and their businesses, ahead of the needs and interests of the special interests that fund campaigns. My opponent, 60% of his campaigns are funded by those special interests. Having the ability to see candidates side by side, I'm certain that they'll make the decision on November 2nd to put our country and our future ahead of political and special interests.
Congressman, let me ask you the same thing.
I'm proud to represent this congressional district. I suppose that's true of every member of Congress, but this is an enormously talented congressional district filled with highly educated people. We have a wonderful industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the medical device industry, financial services, and it's really a joy to represent this congressional district. And I believe that the voters are discerning. There are slightly more registered Democrats than there are registered Republicans in this district. It's pretty darn close, but by far most of the voters are neither Democrats nor Republicans. They are what we call in New Jersey unaffiliated voters, really independent voters. And obviously it is my responsibility to reach out to independent voters as well as to discerning Democrats. And I've always tried to operate in a bipartisan capacity. I think that was my reputation when I was in the state legislature, and I will continue to do so. I think this election will be based on the critical issues confronting the American nation, the unemployment rate of 9.6%, 9.7% in New Jersey, and the fact that we need to reform our system in Congress regarding levels of federal deficits year in and year out and the overall federal debt. I think the people of the United States and the people of this congressional district want some check and balance in Washington, and I certainly think they want to retire Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House of Representatives.
You raise an interesting point, and let me throw this out there. You have the Tea Party on one hand, if people are just angry at Washington. They want change, they want something new, they want a sense that they are in some measure of control. of spending, of other things that go on in Washington that they don't have a part of. That would perhaps give the newcomers a chance to stake a claim there. But on the flip side of that, their voters are looking and saying, well, but we need people with experience, and we need people who know how to get the job done. And I guess my question to you on this point is, do you feel you have the strength in that area as opposed to the newcomer?
I certainly feel frustrated these last 2 years because our proposals, by and large, have not been considered. For the first time in history, Congress has engaged in the House of Representatives in what is known as a closed rule. That means we could not offer amendments on the floor of the House to any bill offered by the Democratic majority. It's never happened in the history of Congress except for these last 2 years. I'm extremely critical of Nancy Pelosi on that. If we take control of the House of Representatives, I think we will have open rules, and that means the minority will be able to offer amendments on the floor of the House. My experience in Washington is limited, and it's only been in the minority. I hope to be able to go into the majority so that I can have a greater effect. But I do believe we will have to work in a bipartisan capacity, and I intend to do so as I have always tried to do so.
Mr. Potosnak, let me ask you that with the caveat that when the Republicans did have majorities in both houses during the Clinton administration, it was very difficult getting anything done. And I wonder if that's something you foresee if, in the event you are selected to go and serve. I mean, how do you deal with this whole bipartisan or lack of bipartisanship?
One of the reasons I'm running for Congress is because I'm frustrated with the partisanship of my opponent, who mentioned Nancy Pelosi tonight. I don't know how many times. I was ticking it off and lost track, as if he's running against Nancy Pelosi. He speaks about bipartisanship, but then talks about retiring someone who's not running in New Jersey. She's from California. And it's career politicians like this that are using these talking points to polarize voters. What we need to do is look at the best ideas to put the needs of our families and businesses ahead of the needs of the special interests. We need people who are willing to stand up to insurance companies, to stand up to big banks, to stand up to Wall Street and fight for us. And what you're hearing from Congressman Lance is a lot of words about bipartisanship. 93% of the time, he voted with the conservative Republican leadership against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which would strengthen our military and ensure we had the best and brightest soldiers serving openly in our armed forces.
Let me address that. That's one of the questions I wanted to get to. Just this Tuesday, military recruiters were told they can accept openly gay applicants. That, of course, after a federal judge placed an injunction prohibiting Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The Department of Justice is appealing that decision. My question, do you support Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or do you agree with the ruling that prohibits that military policy? Congressman, I'll ask you first.
I voted against repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell at the beginning of the summer. And what I said then is I wanted to wait to see the report from the military that is coming to the Congress by the 1st of December. And I will review the report from the military. I think we should have waited until the military gave Congress the report, and I want to review the report once we get it. And incidentally, that report is going to come to Congress while this Congress is still in session. In other words, it's not going to come to Congress in January or February when the Republicans might control the House of Representatives. And one of the factors in my decision was that I recognized that it would be this Congress that would receive the report. Let me say that I do think that those who are gay serve in the military with distinction. They serve under the current proposal that has been the way we have been on this issue since, I think, President Clinton, I think 1993 or 1994. I'm willing to wait until we get the proposal back from the military that is now analyzing this. And I think that we should wait to see what the military decides.
So you don't have a hard and fast position on that?
I do not. And incidentally, I have been one of the co-sponsors of a bill to end discrimination in the workforce, in the private sector workforce, for those based upon that matter. I do not think it's appropriate to discriminate against anybody. And we have that law in New Jersey, and we've had that law in New Jersey for, I think, 18 years, and as a very young member of the Assembly, I voted for it. And I was one of a handful of members on my side to say that we should do that across the country in the private employment sector. Regarding the military, however, I want to wait first to see what the Military Commission recommends to Congress.
Mr. Potosnak, your thoughts?
I do not support the military's don't ask, don't tell policy because it discriminates against lesbian and gay service members who want to serve our country, are willing to put their life on the line for our freedom, and are being forced to do that, to basically live a lie and not be honest. And Congressman Lance, I don't think you read the bill because, in fact, the don't ask, don't tell policy, the bill that was offered, the one he voted against, left room for the military to put out its report and speak on this issue. So you can't have it both ways. He stood up and voted against allowing our military to allow soldiers to serve openly. And also, there's a number of military leaders who have spoken about this. Admiral Mike Mullen, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said he supports repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Secretary Robert Gates, a civilian, has said he supports repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I think on this issue it's clear. He's on the wrong side of our national security interests, from the wrong side of the constituents, what they want in this congressional district, also on the wrong side of history and the Constitution.
On the matter of the military, many viewers watching tonight have a loved one or know someone who has a loved one who is in Afghanistan or Iraq. The president says all U.S. combat forces will be leaving Iraq next year. Meantime, he's sending an additional 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. How would you describe our mission in that part of the world, and how do you think Congress should support that mission? Congressman?
Yes, the president gave a major speech regarding this issue at West Point at the beginning of the year, and I thought it was a well-reasoned speech. And this is one area where I agree with the president, with the Secretary of State Clinton, with the Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. And the president has lessened our role in Iraq. There are now about 50,000 troops in Iraq. It's not in a combat mission, but let me say it's still very dangerous for our troops there. And we've increased our presence in Afghanistan to about 100,000. I am only willing to support the mission in Afghanistan so long as it is in the national security interest of the United States. I do not believe in nation building, and I'm quite critical of that. We should only expend blood and treasure of the American people if it is for the exclusive purpose of the national security interest of this country. That is the mission as outlined by the President of the United States at West Point. I am willing to support that, and then next summer there will be another review, and I hope by then we can begin withdrawing from Afghanistan. And let me say that I certainly commend all of our brave soldiers and others in the military who are in Iraq and now in Afghanistan. I know several young men who are there, and certainly we wish them well, wish them Godspeed and safety. And this is an area where I have supported the president.
Mr. Potosnak, your position on that?
The question was about the goals in Afghanistan, and I think they're unclear. And it's for that reason that I support immediate withdrawal, bringing home our troops. I support our service members. I'm very grateful for their service, for the sacrifices of their families, and their sacrifice. And it's with that respect and that gratitude that I want to bring them home. We're spending far too much money as well in Afghanistan as the lives that are being lost, in Iraq as well. And an economic front, it's important for us to keep spending under control. Each troop that we have overseas costs about $1 million. And I'd like to see that money invested here so we can create jobs, we can work to improve research and development and improve our education. I support our national security. I think it's critical for us to be safe, but I do not support the president on this length of time because they are unclear, our goals.
Let me change.
Might I add to that? The President has said this is for the national security interest of the United States. I've been involved in several classified briefings on this issue. There are al-Qaeda and Taliban in Afghanistan. There are more in neighboring Pakistan. The President is using drone missiles there. I support the President and his mission so long as it is extremely narrowly defined. It is about $100 billion a year, as Mr. Potosnak has said correctly, about $1 million per troop. 100,000 troops in Afghanistan, and I hope by next summer we can begin the withdrawal process. The reason I support the President in a bipartisan capacity is that he has said that this is in the national security interest of the United States.
Let me ask you real quick. There's a changing demographic in the 7th District where we have a much larger influx of immigrants, both legal and illegal. This has been on the forefront for the last couple of years now, the whole immigration issue. Where do you stand on the issue of amnesty, and should that be a part of immigration policy? Let me ask you, Mr. Potosnak.
It's clear that our immigration system is broken. It's failing those folks who want to immigrate here legally. It's failing families that are separated from loved ones by miles and continents. Sometimes people wait 20 years to be reunited with their loved ones. Our family immigration system is broken, and our employment-based immigration system as well. And it's been far too long that Congress has not tackled this issue. I think it's really important that we secure our borders to ensure that the drugs, that the weapons, and also human trafficking are under control.
But is amnesty a part of what you would put into place?
I think we need to make sure that folks who want to be here legally have a path to citizenship.
Congressman, let me ask you the same question.
I think we disagree on this issue. I am opposed to amnesty in any form whatever. What I think we should do first is secure our border, and that is not the case now, and at the same time have an e-verification system for employees. And there's some in the business community, and I'm generally supportive of the business community, there are some in the business community who oppose this because they don't really want to take responsibility, and I think it's important for the business community to take responsibility as well. You are absolutely right about this congressional district. There is an increasing Asian population in Union County, certainly in Middlesex County and in Somerset County as well. And those are persons who are here legally. And we should place at the top of the line, at the beginning of the line, those who want to come here legally. And while I'm on this topic, let me say that I think it was inappropriate for the federal government to sue Arizona. The Arizona legislature and the Arizona governor were merely reacting to a situation not of their creation, because we at the federal level have not taken the bull by the horns, and I'm very critical of this Congress in this area. We need to secure our borders, and we need an e-verification system.
I want to change lanes here and talk about a documentary you may have heard of called The Soprano State. It premiered earlier this week. It's based on, of course, a book by the same name about New Jersey's corruption. At the premiere, Governor Christie told News 12 New Jersey's John Bathke, quote, "We always have a corruption problem in New Jersey. We'll always have a corruption problem here in New Jersey. What do you say to voters watching tonight who've lost their trust in our political system and think all politicians are part of the Soprano State?"
It's funny you should mention that, because it's a book that I'm currently reading. I haven't had a chance to see the movie yet. You know, it's a problem when we have corruption and people lose faith. I think it's critical that we have an opportunity to elect people who have real-world experience, who are willing to stand up to special interests, to fight for our families and businesses, and when they lose faith, to know that they have someone like myself with experience in the real world to get things moving in the right direction, to create the jobs that are so desperately needed, and work to ensure transparency. My opponent supports the Citizens United Supreme Court case, which allows corporations to funnel unlimited amounts of money into campaigns, influencing our elections. I do not. I think it's wrong. We have to keep corporations out of influencing elections.
Congressman, let me ask you to respond to that.
Yes, thank you very much. I have read the book. It was written by Sandy McClure, who was a wonderful reporter in the State House whom I knew. It's an excellent book. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I will see it. It's produced by Steve Califer, someone I know, someone I deeply respect. Steve Califer is a businessman. He has many car dealerships in this state, and he has produced other movies in the past and, of a religious nature, and I'm sure it's an excellent movie, and I give him great credit, as I do Sandy McClure, who wrote the book. Governor Christie, I think, has taken the lead in this area when he was the United States Attorney for the District of New Jersey. And I believe that he's done a terrific job, and he's now doing a terrific job regarding potential corruption as governor. He appointed a Democrat as our Attorney General, formerly the prosecutor in Essex County, and I have great confidence in this governor and in his administration. To the people of New Jersey, let me say that I have always tried to serve with the highest integrity. In endorsing me today, the Recorder newspapers indicated that one of the reasons they were endorsing me was my integrity. Regarding the Citizens United decision, Mr. Potosnak and I disagree on this decision. This is a matter of free speech. Clearly, the reasoning of Justice Anthony Kennedy, who wrote the decision, I think rings a clarion call for free speech. And incidentally, that decision is not only for the business community, it is for labor unions as well. And I do not want to stifle free speech for anybody, not for the business community, not for labor unions, not for anybody. And we in New Jersey have a wonderful tradition in this regard. We were the first state in the nation to ratify the Bill of Rights, which of course includes the First Amendment. We ratified the Bill of Rights in 1791.
Aside from the history lesson, but thank you very much. Running out of time, I want to get to kind of a lighter question here. It's hard to turn on the TV and not see some show about Jersey, Jersey Shore, Housewives of New Jersey, Jerseylicious, a number of other things. They're hugely popular, but they paint what some say is a very unflattering picture of New Jersey. Let me ask your thoughts on what the media has done here and how we deal with that. Mr. Potosnak?
I love New Jersey. Born and raised here, and like I said, put myself through 2 degrees at Rutgers. It's reality TV, it's sensational, and it's for entertainment, and just that. I think it's important for me to clarify that what Congressman Lance was discussing as far as the Citizens United decision, I don't see how corporations are people, and that the First Amendment protecting our free speech should be extended to corporations. I think they have lots of control already and a very loud voice. I think the special interests, it's clear, are controlling the agenda in Washington, and we need to put a stop to unlimited donations that are not being reported. He talks about the fact that we need to have transparency, but in fact that legislation, the Disclose Act that he voted against, it would allow for that transparency that is not existing.
Let me stop you for a second. I want to give the Congressman a chance to respond to that last question.
Yeah, well, thank you. The Disclosed Act was an unfair act. It was opposed by the ACLU. It would require regulation of some, but not of others. It would not require regulation of the NRA or of AARP, and I certainly voted against that act, and that act is clearly dead in the United States Senate because it was unfair, and leading groups, including liberal groups like the ACLU, have vigorously opposed it. Regarding New Jersey is a terrific state, and in Washington I point out all of the time to my colleagues what a terrific state New Jersey is. As another history lesson, New Jersey was the only colony to have two colleges, Princeton and Rutgers, and both wonderful schools, and we have other wonderful institutions of higher education. We have a very sophisticated workforce in New Jersey, and I'm proud to be a New Jerseyan.
All right, on that note, we're going to have closing statements from both of you. Mr. Potosnak, we'll give you the opportunity to speak first.
Okay. Again, I want to thank you very much, Brian, for the opportunity to be here, and Congressman Lance for joining us. I think what we heard tonight was a lot of bluster, Washington speak. We heard about Nancy Pelosi and retiring her. We heard about partisanship. In addition, we heard a number of history lessons. What people are looking for are jobs. They want to make sure that their children, when they graduate from college, have access to a good job, that we prepare our future generation for those jobs, for the workforce, so we can be the most innovative nation in the world. Congressman Lance, since going to Washington, you've only spoken about jobs for 59 seconds, less than a minute, about this, the most critical issue. My background is as a science teacher. I'm also a small business owner, and I'm working for your future, not a political career. I do not believe that returning a 25-year career politician back to Washington, one who's wed to special interests, is the answer. I'm a science teacher and a small business owner. I'm going to put your priorities ahead of the priorities of the special interests that are controlling the agenda. Make sure we get our priorities right, that we work to create jobs with our small businesses and investments in research and development, and ensure that America gets its edge back.
Thank you, Mr. Potosnak. And now you will have the chance, Congressman, to offer your closing statement.
Thank you very much, Brian, and my thanks to Mr. Potosnak for joining us this evening. Certainly my thanks to News 12 New Jersey. I have spoken repeatedly about the fact that we need more employment in this country. Where are the jobs? Please go to my website at lance.house.gov, where you will see the many instances where I have spoken out for creating new jobs in this country. That is the #1 issue confronting the American nation, the fact that under this Congress, unemployment has increased from 8% to 9.6%. We need to do a better job. The fundamental issue confronting this country after we get out of this terrible recession is the fact that we have an enormous debt of $13 trillion, and it's rising rapidly, and we have annual deficits of $1.3 and $1.4 trillion. This is the critical issue confronting the American nation in the 21st century. I hope to work on this issue in the new Congress, as I am New Jersey's leading opponent of borrowing without voter approval. The Lance Amendment to our state constitution prohibits further state borrowing without voter approval. I'm very proud of that fact. Let me say that I am very proud to be able to serve the residents of District 7 in Washington. It is a magnificent district to serve. And I am proud of the fact that I have been endorsed by the Courier News, a paper that covers the entire congressional district. The Courier News has said that I am a good fit for the district and a good fit for the nation. And I am proud to have been endorsed by the Recorder newspapers, the Bernardsville News and the Hunterdon Review. And they endorsed me based upon their belief in my fiscal responsibility and in my integrity. And I ask for your vote on November 2nd.
Congressman Leonard Lance, thank you very much for joining us. Candidate Ed Potosnak, thank you very much for joining us. We hope that the 7th District voters are a bit more enlightened as they leave tonight. For the latest on all of the races around the state, we invite you to go to our website, news12.com, and be sure to join us on election night. Thanks for watching. I'm Bryan Jenkins. Have a good night.
Thank you.
12 New Jersey.
Closed captioning is brought to you by IOTV with incredible HD picture and sound. IOTV brings you an extraordinary HD experience free. Visit Optimum.com today to learn more.
Around New Jersey, around the clock. This is News 12 New Jersey.